Hello friends, welcome to this ISC board class 12 English literature lesson to build a fire by Jack London. Let me read out the themes. But before I can read out the themes, I just want to inform you that this video is a little bit long. I usually try to make my videos, just 12 to 15 minutes. But this has gone a little bit more than that because the lesson, as you understand, is quite big. And there is actually no shortcut, so please be till the end if you think you would like to really understand the lesson and answer well in your examination. I tried my best to reduce it, but I really couldn't find any shorter way, so please be with me. Let me read out the themes of this lesson. Conflict between man and nature, pride and overconfidence. Fire can work for us as well as against us. Something as simple as a fire is gaining such a big importance here. Then man's foolishness, rationalism versus instinct, lack of imagination in our modern world. How modernity takes away imagination. I think that's a key takeaway also from this lesson. Adventure and determinism and its consequences. Come, let me see. I also want to read out this summary briefly so you will understand in a nutshell what this lesson is all about, and therefore the slides that follow it will be possibly a little bit easy to, I've just put it in a nutshell here. I'll just read it out very quickly. A young miner and his dog are headed for the old camp on Henderson Creek to join his friends. The temperature is 50 degrees below zero. He was advised not to go alone in such cold. The young man seemed overconfident, doesn't heed the advice. The cold gives him several warnings, which again meant nothing to him. He was unable to imagine the consequences of such cold, of human limitations, starting with his spittle, which froze before it touched the ground, his cheeks, fingers, toes, arms, legs, and finally his body froze to death. The dog survived and reached the camp where he could find warmth and food. Now let's see, foreshadowing. Now this is the first line of this lesson, and how the first line tells you what is going to come. Foreshadowing. Day had dawned cold and grey when the man turned aside from the main Yukon trail. So the day, if you see the opposites that are there, it is day and yet it is mentioned grey. Grey is usually in the evening time when the sun sets. It is cold. Now how can it be grey early in the morning? And another important point is, if you can see, the man turned aside from the main Yukon trail. So, at times human beings like to deviate and go their own way without understanding its consequences. So the main trail that was there and where all the other people traveled, he went away from that. He deviated and he had to face the consequences. Now the setting, again, this is very important because it's going to be a question that's going to come. A very important question, most likely to come. Explain the importance, significance, and what the setting was all about. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. There was no sun or promise of sun. Although there was not a cloud in the sky, it was a clear day. However, there seemed to be an indescribable darkness over the face of things. Okay, there's a mistake, spelling mistake in the word over. Now this is the setting, this is in the beginning. It is morning and like we said, it is dark. Now no promise of sun means that it is not that the sun cannot be seen because of cloud. There is no clouds also. So in spite of the absence of cloud, you cannot see the sun. Now this does not bode well for us. It was a clear day. So it's not a cloudy day. And there was darkness. Now darkness, possibly the writer is trying to tell us the physical darkness. It was dark. You can't see too well, and it was very, like an evening time. That is one darkness. Possibly another darkness that the writer must be trying to tell us is the darkness in the human mind. This man's mind was clouded. It was dark. And in darkness, we can't see things properly. Maybe he couldn't see things properly in terms of, understanding things, in terms of imagining, and in terms of consequences. So there are certain areas of our lives also too where we go through patches of darkness and we cannot see very clearly. So this is a setting to tell you exactly what's going on in the mind of this man. Now please keep in mind the setting. Okay, imagination, most important. In fact, almost the key learning point here. The trouble with him was that he was unable to imagine. He was quick and ready in the things of life, but only in the things and not in their meanings. Yeah, imagination is to be able to see beyond what you can see on face of things. Yeah, understanding at a deeper level, understanding the consequences and looking beyond. That is imagination. Now that was absent in this man. And there are various reasons today also why imagination is lacking in us. Yeah, various reasons could be assigned to it. Maybe modernity, technology, the new world, and maybe easy way of life, maybe clouding this imagination of ours. We are not able to imagine. Now, this was the problem with him. He couldn't foresee, and therefore he had to pay the price. Now, he was receiving a lot of warnings also. He forced some water from his mouth. There was a sudden noise that surprised him. In the air, before it could fall to the snow, the drops of water became ice that broke with the noise. You can imagine water before it falls to the ground turns into ice. Now, this is a warning. And like we said, he had no imagination. See, there are times, water may take around 5 minutes to become ice, 10 minutes or, half an hour to become ice. Here it became ice before it could touch the ground. This was a warning. He was unable to imagine the consequences when such a thing is happening. So that is what we say, that he lacked imagination. Man's rationalism versus nature's instinct. Following the man's heel was a big native dog. The animal was worried by the great cold. It knew that this was no time for traveling. Its own feeling was closer to the truth than the man's judgment. So very nicely the writer is contrasting man with nature, and maybe dog possibly is representing nature. Possibly dog represents all those things that maybe one would wish it was there in man also. But the sad part, it is not there. It was not there in this case. And most often, possibly, it may not be and will not be there in human beings because of their intelligence and because of the modern world, because of technology, and because of possibly overconfidence. Warnings. Also, the man had tobacco in his mouth. The ice held his lips so tightly together that he could not empty the juice from his mouth. He was not able to spit out that tobacco juice because the entire thing had become into ice at his mouth. The little that was coming out gets converted into ice immediately. So that's the level of cold which he was not able to imagine, and imagine its consequences. Relationship with his dog. Once sensing danger, he made the dog go ahead. The dog did not want to go. It hesitated until the man pushed it forward. Then it went quickly across the white unbroken surface. Suddenly it fell through the ice. Again here, this is maybe possibly another theme, that man does not have any concern for nature. Man does not have any concern for the dog. See, there are certain hot springs possibly where below the ice there is still water. That water has not managed to turn into ice. So it is a very thin layer of ice, and below that it's water. So anybody walking on that will go through. So the man did not want to go through. So he pushed his dog. Maybe if the dog went through, then he knows that ice is thin. So it's okay for the dog to fall in, but not for the man. So it shows also the relationship and the very less concern that we have for nature. Again, warnings. He removed the mittens from his right hand and helped the dog tear out the pieces of ice. He did not bare his finger for more than a minute and was surprised to find that they were numb. It certainly was cold. Can you imagine, you remove your mittens for a minute and your fingers become numb? So you can imagine the level of cold. Now this was a warning, but to him it meant nothing. To him it meant, okay, so my fingers are becoming numb in 1 minute. Usually it can take 10 minutes, sometimes it can take half an hour, but in my case it is 1 minute. So for him it's a matter of minutes. That's all. Lights a fire for the first time. He tried to take a mouthful, but the ice around his mouth prevented him. He laughed at his own foolishness. He also noticed his fingers and toes were getting numb. He proceeds to make a fire. Yeah, now this again is very important. The word fire is very important. Remember, it's also the title of the lesson. Yeah, to build a fire. So one question possibly can come on the significance of fire. Yeah, why it is mentioned. Fire is important to us. It may be something very simple, but it can be important, very important to us. Yeah, here this man cannot eat without a fire. He realizes that okay, this his food is really very cold. Although he kept it against his bare chest to get the warmth from his body, yet it was not possible to eat. He needed a fire. So the importance and significance of fire, something that we take for granted. Man's intellect versus dog's instinct. When the man had finished eating, he started on his journey. The dog was sorry to leave and looked towards the fire. The man did not know cold because he had not experienced it, but the dog knew cold, real cold. It knew this was not the time to walk outside in such fearful cold. So when the man finished eating, he made his food warm, and he finished. He proceeded on his journey. Yeah. He was supposed to meet his friends at 6 o'clock in the evening, and he starts at 9 o'clock in the morning. So the journey is long, and long in such cold where in a minute the fingers become numb. Now, in this cold, is it right to go? Well, for the man, it meant nothing. For the man, it's a matter of calculation. When we say he lacked imagination and did not know the things and its meaning, for him it was just a matter of calculation. If I have to start, then I have to reach there, then this is my speed and this is the distance I need to cover. But the dog was thinking differently. Dog did not know all these calculations. But all the dog knew that I think this is not the right time to move. And he was looking back towards the fire, realizing I think that we are making a big mistake leaving the fire behind and going out into the cold. Dangers. And then it happened at a place where there was no sign. The man broke through. He cursed his luck aloud. This would delay him by an hour. He builds a fire the second time. Yeah, again, the significance of fire. First time it was for the food. Second time it was to warm his clothes, his moccasins, his mittens, his fingers, his face and all that stuff. When he goes through and he comes out, water becomes ice immediately. So his moccasins also was soaked and it was so hard like rock that without a fire he couldn't proceed. He had to build a fire to melt that ice and to be normal again. The second fire is put out. Now the tree under which he had built the fire carried a weight of snow on his branches. Each time he pulled a stick, he shook the tree slightly. The snow fell without warning upon the man and the fire was dead. Now he builds that fire below a tree because he thought it was convenient to pull out those branches and put in the fire. So at times we do a lot of things which is only good for us, good for our thinking and good for our convenience. But as he pulled out, the snow started shifting and that entire thing fell on the fire and put the fire off. So he was not able to see also beyond this and understand the consequences, that why do you pull out branches when you know that the tree could shake and the thing could fall on your fire. Perhaps he needed a companion. Perhaps the old man at Sulphur Creek was right. He would be in no danger. The companion would build the fire. See, there was an old man at Sulphur Creek who kept warning him that please don't go out. I think it is too cold. Don't go out. Now he treated this old man as foolish. He says, I've gone in cold. So what's the problem? Now he realizes maybe I think that man could have been right. Yeah, it is difficult. It is difficult to manage. His fingers were numb, his toes and feet were badly frozen. Now he lost the sensation in his arms and legs. Yeah, he must build the fire again. This time he cannot fail. At below 75 degrees a man can't fail. Significance of fire. Significance of fire, it could be the difference between success and failure. Yeah, and it is below 75 degrees of your freezing point, that is below zero. 75 degrees below zero. Now that's really, really cold. And he realizes the advice given by that man at Sulphur Creek. Builds a fire again. He must build the fire again. He bought out the pack of match, but the awful cold had already driven life out of his fingers. Now remember, his fingers became numb and now the fingers were frozen. It's happening very quickly. At degrees 75 below zero, you can imagine. For him, it was just a figure. The word below 70 is below 75 below zero is just a figure. That's the reason it has been constantly mentioned that he does not have imagination. Imagination is the ability to think of consequences. For him, below 75 below zero was just a figure, just a calculation, just a reading on the thermometer. And the reality is, fingers started freezing, his hands started losing his movement, his hands and feet became numb. He had to even look. Now, this again is an important question: is why did the man use sight instead of feeling? It's because there was no feeling in his hands now. So to check whether his hands and legs are on the floor, he had to see. To check where his hands are, he had to see where his hands are, because there was no feeling. Usually we don't check where our hands are. If we put our hands up, with our eyes closed, we know our hands are up because we have the feeling. But if his hands were up, he wouldn't know it is up because there is no feeling that it is up. He had to look whether it is up or it is down. In his effort to separate one match from the others, the whole pack fell in the snow. He tried to pick it out of the snow, but he failed. The dead fingers could neither touch nor hold. Now this was getting really very difficult because his fingers and hands were not mobile. To build that fire, to light that match was becoming difficult. Used his teeth to light the match. He couldn't pick up the match. He picked it up in his teeth and drew it across his leg. 20 times he did this before he succeeded in lighting it. But the burning smell went up his nose, causing him to cough. The match fell into the snow and the fire died. So he managed, but the match was in his mouth and the smoke went into his nose. And immediately, because of the coughing, it fell and falling on wet floor. Naturally, it will not survive. He was determined to save himself. In a desperate attempt to save his life, he lit all the 70 matches of the pack, resulting in the burning of his hand. He endured the pain. Now his hands were burning. He realized even the hands were burning because it was 70 matches at a time. But he endured the pain. He could get the smell of his burning fingers. But he had to endure the pain because it was a question of his entire life now. This was the only way to save his life. Sadly, this fire too was extinguished when a large piece of wet plant fell on it. So even this went off now. Simply because his hands couldn't be used, his fingers couldn't be used, he's struggling. And a simple thing like to build a fire is now becoming difficult. So remember, like I said, the fire could be a question that could come. It is also the title of your lesson, the significance of fire, how it is important to us, how something so small can be so, the difference between success and failure. It could be the difference between life and death. And that's the significance of fire. His last hope, the sight of the dog put a wild idea into his head. He could kill the dog and bury his hands in the warm body until feeling returned to them, but this was impossible. With his frozen hand, he could neither draw nor hold his knife. He remembered a story where a man survived because he killed that animal that he was traveling with and buried himself. I think it was a bigger animal, and he was able to bury himself into the carcass of the animal, and there was heat, and that's how he survived actually. So the same thought came, but he was not able to draw his knife, neither was he able to really hold the dog to kill it. Max, he could just put his arms around and the dog escaped again. Meeting death with dignity. When he could go no further, he thought of meeting death with dignity. He was certain to freeze in his present circumstances and he should accept it calmly. Now remember, one thing is, whenever we go through crisis, problems, there are stages of this crisis. The first stage of crisis is Denial, and the last stage is acceptance. You know, he went through the denial stage in the early part where he denied the fact that there was anything great in this cold that is there. Yeah, he denied it unconsciously. He was not aware, he was not experienced. Yeah, he did not have imagination. So he denied the truth that this is not the right time to travel. And he's ending up with accepting the fact, okay, I think it is not the right time to travel. I think it's going to take my life. Or let me die in dignity. Yeah. So the first stage is denial, and the last stage is acceptance. So he wants to meet death with dignity now. This is a normal stage that anybody could go through. Well, it's a human characteristic. Learning in life. You were right, old fellow, you were right. Now remember one thing, this is important. This line can come as a question. Now in the entire lesson, now remember this is a very big lesson. In this entire lesson, this is the only line in quotation marks. You know, the writer possibly purposely put this in quotation mark because he wanted to highlight the fact that if there were other quotation marks, then this would lose its significance, or it would be diluted a bit. He did not want to dilute this line because this line pertains to learning. The man finally learnt his lesson and with his own mouth and tongue confessed that the man at Sulphur Creek who was giving him that advice was finally right. Remember, all through the lesson, you need to read the lesson at least once and pick out important points that, as we have explained here, that many times he was laughing at that old man when he gave that advice not to travel alone. And finally he accepts that man's advice because now he's dying. Remember one thing is, he has written this story, I think in 1902 also. No, this is I think the 1908 version, what we are reading. The same story was written in 1902 and now rewritten as this story that we are reading. But in 1902, they were a little bit, it was a little bit different. There was a man, the man had a name, yeah, and the man did not die, and the man escaped this cold with a little bit of inconvenience and injury. Yeah. Now remember that man had a name. That's very important, is because when you see a character having a name, you think that this issue pertains to that character. But if you see the latest version, that the 1908 version that he written, the version that we are reading, is the man does not have a name. It is mentioned the man. The man signifies it's something universal. It signifies that we are all this way. We are all thinking like this man. It's a universal message. Secondly, in this version, it is shown that the man dies. Because he thought possibly, now this is my interpretation, that he thought possibly, you can write it, not an issue, that man learns only when issues become a life and death issue. Otherwise, there is no learning taking place. And if you see, this version became more popular than the previous version, where there was no death and he escaped. When people escape with minor injuries, then there is no learning that takes place. Learning takes place only when an issue becomes life and death. So this became more popular. This story made it more popular possibly. Of course, this question will not come for you to compare the 1902 or 1908 version. So I'm just giving it to you for your information because of this particular line where he learns. Very nicely also he has constantly put in the lesson the difference between the boys and the man. So he has to reach the boys at the camp in the evening. So the word boys is written to show you immaturity. And when the advice was given, it's mentioned the man. So the man stands for maturity. So trying to highlight the significance between maturity and immaturity by using these words. Nature triumphs. The dog caught the smell of death. Then it turned down and ran along the trail towards the camp it knew. So in the end, we are finding this character, the dog, wins, survives. So nature survives. Now remember one thing, nature is indifferent to everything on the face of this earth. Nature is not here to kill humans or to kill animals. Nature is absolutely indifferent. It is for us to be able to imagine the consequences and keep out when things are not right. Now that is what the man did not have. It is not that the nature killed him. You see, the dog had the ability to survive, and the dog survived. And when man is not created for this sort of temperature, yeah, the dog, which was like the native cousin brother of the native wolf, full of fur. There was fur coating all around his body. He managed to survive. Yeah, so that's an important point we need to keep in mind, and possibly that could also be the question that could possibly come. Well, friends, if you like this lesson, please, I would request you to kindly subscribe and press the like button. This will help us, motivate us. Remember, because we are not charging anything, these videos are absolutely free for the benefit of students. Remember also, since there is no charge, in case you receive any calls or anybody trying to respond to your messages or comments asking for payment, please report it or report anybody who's trying to copy this lesson. I do hope you enjoyed it, and please look forward to our other lessons that we